Welcome, everyone. Attendees will be filing in as the top of the hour turns. This meeting is being recorded. All the attendees will only be able to interact through the chat pod, so please give us a quick hello, let us know where you're from. And then as you have questions, we have some folks who will be watching the chat pod and asking questions, and then maybe bringing those questions onto the screen through my colleague Mark Andrews. Again, my name is Todd Taylor. I'm going to quickly introduce our guest speakers today, and then I'm going to set the frame, and then we're going to go into the stories they have to tell about digital literacy. So, Jonathan, if you'd quickly introduce yourself, and then hand it over to Melissa to share her introduction as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Jonathan Eaton. I'm the Academic Registrar at Teesside University, which is in the northeast of England. I've got to say that, Todd, you've made my day today by referring to me as one of the cool kids, because I don't think I've ever been described in that in my whole life. So thank you for that. Looking forward to speaking to you all today.
All right. Hi there, I'm Melissa Vito, and I'm the Vice Provost for Academic Innovation at University of Texas, San Antonio. And I'm super excited to be here. I don't drink coffee, but I'm fully stocked with Red Bull, and excited to also be part of the Cool Kids Digital Literacy Cafe with the ultimate cool kid prof, Todd Taylor.
Thanks, everyone. I think I'm going to be controlling your view, the attendees' view, so that it'll be focused on the speakers. Mark Andrews, if you see something fun in the chat pod, or Seb, if you see something in the chat pod, if you open your video and then we'll know to see what you're seeing there. Quick glance in the chat pod. I saw two places that I've been to and love, Edinburgh, Scotland, and Hattiesburg, Mississippi. So thanks for those people sharing where they're from. I see Jason Torres from Washington, D.C. I was just there last week at Bowie State University, who's becoming an Adobe Creative Campus, so a fantastic HBCU in that area. Welcome, everyone. This is the Adobe Creative Campus Digital Literacy Cafe, where we take what's current, what's really sort of in the focus of everyone's concerns in higher education. And as I said earlier, I invite the best, most interesting people to share their thoughts and their experiences about what's going on their campus in this regard. The title of the cafe today is Future Facing Learning for All, Whenever, Wherever, and However. And let me unpack that title just a little bit in terms of setting a frame. First of all, I need to admit right up front that the term future facing learning, I nicked from Teesside University and Jonathan and his colleagues. And it just seemed to be a really appropriate way to think about this, hopefully newest years. We all know what we've been through over the last 2 years. We all know the weights and the challenges, but also the opportunities that have been enabled by the pandemic and the profound seismic impact of that on higher education. And I think what we now have is some pretty good clarity about where we've been and where we're going. And so the idea today is to think positively about taking the lessons we've learned, especially over the last 2 years, and looking forward, facing the future, looking for the opportunities that are ahead of us all to improve higher education, especially in terms of including everyone in being successful. Especially students, and especially students that maybe traditionally or historically weren't as well served by higher education institutions and mechanisms as others. And so as we turn the chapter, as we look forward, I think everyone is agreeing that a lot of the things that we were focused on before the pandemic have only been accelerated. So now we know where we're looking in the long horizon. And so, you know, the subtitle of today is whenever, however, and wherever, but really the whomever, the creating successful higher education opportunities and experiences for all students in particular is the real focal point. And as I said just a minute ago, before the pandemic, there was already an emphasis in higher education on serving students who traditionally haven't been the focus of many of our campuses of serving the entire population and not just selective segments of it, of opening our doors and being more accessible to more students. And that had a lot to do with, at least before the pandemic, with initial sort of experiments with distance learning and online learning, which, as we know, has only been now clearly accelerated, and no one thinks we're going back. As well as the wherever, in terms of educating students maybe online and in hybrid or high flex models, as well as still obviously on the ground. There is whenever, in order to reach more students, in order to help more students be successful, we become aware that we need to have different kinds of experiences, asynchronous, synchronous, a mixture of both, in order to accommodate the needs of as many students as who can benefit from education as possible. And then, of course, there's the however. And even before the pandemic, there was a significant push that's always been very important to me about transforming teaching and learning, about experimental pedagogies, about especially experiential learning, active learning, and career-facing learning that takes what we've been doing for decades in all kinds of educational institutions, from liberal arts to vocational, and making it more directly relevant, or more directly articulating the value of what we're doing, so that students and the folks who are stakeholders in higher education can more directly connect what we're doing in our classes with the future, especially in terms of job and career readiness. And so that's the frame we're here to talk about today. That's the topic in our coffee shop, and I'm thrilled to invite two guests who have more insight into these ideas than anyone I can think of. Let's begin with Jonathan Eaton, if you would. Jonathan, if you'd unmute. And first of all, give us a little profile of your campus and what the idea of future-facing learning means to you right now.
Thanks, Todd. So, as I mentioned, I'm academic registrar at Teesside University, which is based in Middlesbrough in the northeast of England. Just to give you a sense of Middlesbrough, some of you might be fans of the Blade Runner film, and Ridley Scott was born not very far from Middlesbrough, and the legend has it that the landscape of Blade Runner was based on the industrial landscape of Middlesbrough. Now, it looks very different now, and really we're kind of in a post-industrial phase, really, but that gives you a little bit of context of the communities that we serve locally. We have one main campus, which is based in Middlesbrough, and a subsidiary campus, which is mainly around where we work with businesses, and also have a bioscience facility, which is out at Darlington, which is on the East Coast main line. So if ever you're on the train from London going to Edinburgh, you'll flash past our buildings. But essentially, we're one campus made up of around 15,000 students. The majority of our students, about 2/3, come from the local area, so they're commuting on a daily basis into the campus. That means that we tend to have a student population who is slightly older than the traditional 18 to 21 model, and we have a large proportion of students who have significant responsibilities outside of their studies, which might mean they're caring for family members, they have a financial contribution that they make to their domestic setup. So that gives us a slightly distinctive student population within the region. We also have growing numbers of international students as well, many of whom are based in accommodation on our campus or locally. We have particular discipline strengths in things like nursing, computing, engineering, and business, and we work with a range of colleges local to the university who flow students onto our courses as well. But we're very much based on serving the needs of the local community. Now, we've been on quite a journey around digital transformation of learning and teaching that really began in 2016. Because in 2016, we sat down and looked properly at our learning and teaching strategy. And what we realized was we had a document, but the document really wasn't making much traction for our staff, our students, and other stakeholders of the university. So we spent a lot of time through workshops and outreach sessions, really trying to hone and sharpen what our vision for the future of education was. And what we developed was future-facing learning, which Todd alluded to. What future-facing learning means is essentially providing our students with the skills, knowledge, and expertise that they will need to thrive in complex and uncertain futures. What we recognised in 2016 was that although we could educate our students for the first steps on their career ladder throughout their journey in life, they're going to encounter significant challenges that we can't really predict, whether that's changes in the labour market as a result of automation, whether it's due to the big global challenges that we face around global warming. And of course, at that stage, we couldn't predict that the pandemic would hit us. So we really wanted to understand, how can we develop our students to become lifelong learners, to have a toolkit that they can access through the decades to come when they encounter those challenges, to make a really positive contribution to the society that they serve. So what that meant for us was we really developed 5 core themes, which we threaded throughout the curriculum. And those are the things that we want our students and our graduates to be able to exhibit and talk about when they graduate. And for us, those in no particular order are being future ready, being globally connected, being socially and ethically engaged, being research active, whatever that means for their particular discipline, and most importantly, being digitally empowered. And what we mean about digital empowerment is giving our staff and our students the skills and the access they need to be empowered by digital technologies. And where that journey has led us has been really to focus on establishing a level playing field for all of our staff and students in parity of access to technology and the skills they'll need to harness that technology. So for us, that meant providing all of our staff and our full-time undergraduates with devices to access a toolkit of apps, which we deployed and trained everyone in using. And in November 2020, we became the first Adobe Creative Campus in Europe. So we're on a journey so far. It's set us up, I think, well for managing some of the challenges of the pandemic, but we're on a journey and a trajectory where we know there's a lot more to do, and looking forward to discussing that in more detail today. Thanks, Todd.
Thanks for that overview. You know, when Jonathan and I were talking, he's like, do I need to sort of translate lots of things because, you know, the UK system and the European system of higher education is different, and than the North American system, is different than the Australian system. And it occurs to me, yeah, there are significant differences, but these issues that we're talking about, I find to be universal. And so everyone is talking about the same thing. And so I think it's really great that we're having someone from Europe talking about these same issues that are impacting everyone, and especially most of the folks here in the audience from North America. Now we're going to ask Melissa Vito to unmute and introduce her campus. Speaking of future-facing learning, the University of Texas at San Antonio is one of the campuses, the few campuses I know whose enrollments are actually going up at this moment, and I think it's because of that future-facing, emphasis they have by a different name that explains why they're being so successful right now. Melissa, over to you.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Todd. And let me see, I was gonna share my screen. Let's go back to video and, okay, screen share. Okay, we're up. Can you guys see this? There we go. All righty. Let me tell you a little bit about UT San Antonio. And we're, as higher education institutions in this country go, we're relatively young. And so we're a little bit over 50. So we like to think of that, 50, the new 30. So we're young. We have a young group of alumni, and we are a school that's on the move. And that's the thing I love about us. Our enrollment is around 35,000. You can see the number of faculty we have. Actually, our 21 research expenditures are going to be over 140 million. And we just received Research One designation, which is a really, really exciting move for this institution, and distinguishes us from other institutions. You can see the basics here. Here's a little bit more about kind of who our students are. UTSA was one of the first Hispanic serving institutions in the country. And we were part of the original 3 Hispanic serving institutions, which has been not only important to us because we live in San Antonio and we have a high demographic of Hispanic and Latino population, but it is part of who we are. And we have a mission to bring people up, to serve our students, and to make sure that everybody succeeds. Our graduation rates have been improving. Our numbers are strong. We are growing our online programs. The rankings just came up and we improved our position in our rankings by about 70%. And so we have a lot going for us right now. We are a school that is moving forward, that's growing in student population, and that is driven by certain core values. And so you can see here the Adobe symbol, because we're an Adobe Creative Campus. We're very proud of that. And I'm going to go back and stop sharing. And became a creative campus about 2 years ago. We were the first large public institution in Texas to achieve that status. What it means is it aligns to one of the values of UTSA, which is that we focus on classroom to career. And so we looked at the Adobe Creative Campus designation as one that would give us more to offer our faculty along with our students. And we're seeing that. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. I want to go back for a second, though, because Todd asked us to think about future focused learning. And when I was listening to Jonathan, I was thinking exactly what Todd was. There are so many similarities to what we're all experiencing in higher education around the globe. I mean, there really are. And the pandemic was an accelerant to a whole lot of things that were starting to germinate. And so I think, and this is what's driving us at UTSA, the future of learning is clearly more personal. And it's clearly lifelong. We have to focus on all groups, not just the traditional 18 to 22-year-olds, or as Jonathan said, you have an older population, but we have to be thinking about adult learners. You know, people talk about the Great Resignation and what that means. But for me, what it means is we have a whole population that can need continuing education and upgrading of skills. And so a focus at UTSA is not only in growing our freshman class and growing our online, but making sure that we're serving our corporate partners and those adults that are trying to figure out at the age of 50 what they really want to do and how they build their skills. So I think it's lifelong, it's more personal. It is clearly ubiquitous across modalities. And I think that we finally are hitting the point where people aren't looking at online as less than, but simply looking at it as a different modality and a different way to be able to engage in learning. I think for us at UTSA and those of us in the profession that focus on teaching and learning, we need to catch up. And so one of the things that we're doing at San Antonio that I'm really proud of is that we've taken the silos that typically have existed around digital learning and teaching and learning, and then students sort of fit somewhere else, and we're bringing them together. So we have an area now that is built around teaching, learning, and digital transformation. And we all work across all modalities, and our goal is to focus on innovation and creativity and how we stay connected to our students in meeting their needs. So we have a student advisory group. We meet regularly and connect with them to understand. It's interesting as we're trying to seed creativity and innovation among our faculty. We try to anchor it in things like digital literacy, career preparation, and making sure that our students are ready. We talk about not only educating this group of students, but trying to think about what today's third graders or fifth graders are going to need and to be prepared for that. And so that is a lot of sort of the horizon that's driving us at UTSA in our work. And we participated. I think the other thing that's important for us in higher ed at UTSA is how we think about defining student success. And I think that as the population of students becomes more diverse, whether it's ethnic diversity, socioeconomic diversity, or demographic diversity in terms of age or where you are, we need to rethink how we define student success. And typically we're measured by freshman to sophomore retention and, grades and those typical standards. But one of the things that we're starting to focus on is, how are there some unexpected ways that we can promote student success that may not have been obvious to us in the past? And so we're doing that on the student end and on the teaching and learning end, and I'll talk about that later. We also are trying to challenge ourselves to measure our own impact. But at the student end, one of the things that we were really fortunate to be able to participate in is a study that was commissioned to Civitas, which is an ed tech company that focuses on data analytics around student success. And we looked at the impact of using Adobe Creative Cloud in courses and whether or not it actually made a difference. And Todd, I don't know if you want me to talk about this now or if we get into it later, if I use that as a tease. The point of it is, we need to challenge ourselves to rethink student success. And we've found some kind of unexpected outcomes that may help drive us as we continue our work to help our students be successful. So
that's great. No, I just put a link to the blog for the Civitas research, and we want to dive into that a little bit more closely. And I want to pick up on that idea of student success, and at least in terms of the focus of the wherever, whenever, however. Jonathan, I'd like to hear your perspective on the however, the teaching practices, especially in terms of how becoming an Adobe Creative Campus has given a focal point to what goes by many names: experiential learning, project-based learning, learning by doing, learning by making. And for those of you that are out there who don't know what the Adobe Creative Campus program is, it's a partnership between Adobe and campuses like UTSA and T-Side that put these the toolkit that students need to be a participant in the digital economies and digital cultures of our time. And so the focus is on putting these tools in the hands of students in every class across the curriculum, to learn by making, to learn by doing. And so I know one difference in vocabulary, I believe, between the UK and the US is what I call an assignment. You call, I believe, an assessment. And so, Jonathan, I've heard you give some really fascinating conversations about how you're rethinking the kinds of assessments that students are performing in your curriculum. So let's focus at least at first on the however. How can having these digital tools help really engage and create for different kinds of assessments and assignments?
Thanks, Todd. I think we came to realize over perhaps the last 5 years that we had a significant amount of work to do on how we were using assessment, that perhaps many of the methods we were using were overly traditional, and most significantly were not helping prepare our students for the workplace, and in particular securing those jobs that they were very keen to. And the feedback that we got from employers was that often our graduates actually lacked confidence, and sometimes almost low self-esteem of what they were capable of, but also what they'd done. And when we first began to engage with Adobe and looked at the fantastic work that existing creative campuses had done, we realized that the missing element was really around storytelling and creativity, and allowing our students to almost unleash their own potential by removing the academic parameters that we were putting in place, and almost forcing our students to create artifacts which were academic solely in nature. So we were doing too much assessment. We were burdening students with various types of assessment throughout their journeys on their courses, which didn't necessarily replicate what they would be doing in the real world, and weren't enabling them to show their creativity and reflect their personal journeys as well. And I remember a few examples of outputs from other creative campuses that individual students had generated, which you know, we still talk about today how impressive they were. But at the same time, we didn't want to force digital where it doesn't belong, and that's been a mantra that we've used throughout our journey of making sure that what we do is enable our academics to use tools in ways that work for their students and their discipline. And therefore, we've always focused on celebrating and recognizing what individuals are doing to show everyone across the institution what the possibilities might look like without mandating anything. So we've begun to focus quite heavily on essentially supporting projects within each of our faculties that are led by academics to trial and test new ideas within the curriculum with a particular focus on assessment. And one of the first ones we did was last year in our business school. We had a particular module that all of our first year undergraduates did, which was project based. And it had been a module that for several years had been challenging for students, that they were new to university, but most importantly, they were new to thinking in an interdisciplinary way and working collaboratively with their peers. So we used the Adobe Creative Cloud Suite to transform the possibilities around assessment, to take away some of those false parameters that we put in place and allow them to think and demonstrate their thinking in new ways, in exactly the way that they would in their workplace. We saw some fantastic improvements in terms of student satisfaction, but also interestingly how stretched the students felt in a positive way by working in that particular environment. This academic year, we've seeded with Adobe projects in each of our faculties, which are trialing and testing new approaches to assessment, and we're really excited to see the outcomes of those. Thank you.
Yeah, that mirrors my experience as a classroom teacher. I've had actually great success in a developmental writing class in a summer bridge program by having exactly the same learning outcomes as I had for a print-based essay. But once we enable students to do things like convert that print modality into something much more, where they can include lots of media elements, you know, we're throwing off those artificial parameters that not only I found can send messages to lots of students that the modalities that they work with all day, you know, in their lives daily, don't belong in this space of higher education. Not only that, these are the modalities that are increasingly important in the workplace. And so for them to have experiences early in their career, in their studies, like you mentioned in the early business class there, now they can stack and scaffold those experiences throughout their program of study, so that they're getting to a place where they can graduate with that confidence, exactly what you're talking about. Melissa, on this issue of however and transforming teaching and learning, I know that's something you've done a lot of thinking about, and I had the great privilege of visiting your campus, where the culture of commitment to innovative teaching and learning is just outstanding. And so it was a real pleasure to be a part of that. What are you seeing in terms of the integration of digital technologies, and especially what's being enabled by being a creative campus in terms of the kinds of transformations that Jonathan was just talking about?
Yeah, thanks, Todd. It's a really great question, and totally agree with you about the faculty at UTSA. It's not the only campus I've worked at, and I've never worked with a faculty that's more open and engaged to new types of learning. And a shout out to Red Madden, because I know you're in the audience and you were one of our very first early adopters for Adobe Creative Cloud. I think there are a couple of things that are happening. I think in higher ed broadly writ, in Texas as a system, and at UTSA, we're looking at two different things. I think people realize that we haven't really embedded the kinds of tools that students may necessarily need that can either help them be extra engaged and really do better in their courses, or just simply be better prepared when they leave. So I think people are looking at two different things. One, sort of the whole concept of micro-credentialing and how you insert something into an assessment, Jonathan, or a course that may be a module or a simple piece, but not necessarily embedded in the curriculum. And I think that that's in response to a lot of what business and industry is saying they're needing, and also to scaffold curricula that don't necessarily focus on tools, like maybe those areas of liberal arts and fine arts, or some of the areas that are less technical. So you've got that way of doing it. And then you've got the Adobe Creative Cloud as an example of something where we have really integrated it into the curriculum. When we became a creative campus, our focus was on if we could engage our faculty in learning about how to use the Adobe Creative Campus suite of tools, that will get to our students. And that's the fastest way to engage our students, because we know the co-curricular is super important for student learning. And yet at the end of the day, what they experience with a faculty member and in the classroom is going to really be a part of who they are and what they'll learn. So our focus was on our faculty. We did set up an Adobe Ambassadors group, but in working with our faculty, we were able to develop a set of courses across multiple different areas, from ranging from typical things like architecture and the arts, but also to physics and Spanish and a whole array of courses, and then actually take a look at what it means. And Jonathan, you mentioned the word confidence. And I think one thing that we saw in utilizing the Adobe Creative Cloud suite of tools is that we saw faculty confidence grow in learning new things and actually re-engaging with their curriculum. And so, Todd, as you talk about maintaining the same types of learning outcomes, you do that, but you do it in different ways. And we felt, we see it from our students and we hear from our students, just a heightened sense of engagement, because they can own the way they want to convey information and ideas. And that's what's been really important. And so I think, when you ask about the future, I think the future is looking at how we are able to embed more seamlessly things like Adobe Creative Cloud, and then find ways to measure it. I mean, what was so important to us when we and full disclosure, I helped sort of lead this project. So we had East Tennessee State and Cal State Fullerton and UTSA that participated, but didn't do the data work. But to be able to look at what we saw and realize that it makes a difference. And for us at UTSA, we saw higher rates of A's and B's. We saw higher rates of grade averages in the courses and at the end of the term, and even some instances of higher rates of persistence, most especially in the groups where we would find them least likely to succeed. So those are in our lower academic bands of students, and we know that from demographic data, and among some of our ethnically diverse students who simply may communicate in different ways. And so to have been able to see this impact is really important for how we expand this. The college at UTSA, our College of Liberal and Fine Arts has established a Center for Digital Literacy. And we're working very closely with them in our areas to amplify the use of Adobe Creative Cloud across the curriculum, and also to look at other tools and other ways that we may be also wanting to work with this. So that's the student end. I think for us in teaching and learning, and I say digital transformation, we've set up, we use, Jonathan, just like you, we call it kind of ideas to pilot to impact. And so we set aside $200,000 this year out of our budget to set it out to faculty to get their ideas and to get them inspired to try new things. No harm, no foul. So all that we ask is that they look at ways they could measure it, that we stay in contact and they have a good idea, and that they're using tools like this. That was one of the areas, this along with things like inclusive pedagogy, which I think links to things like using Adobe Creative Cloud, that is also kind of an equalizer across learning. And so we put this out. We've got a 26 awesome faculty who are working on things like humor in the classroom and the impact on student learning, a whole array of things, interdisciplinary work. Jonathan, we did that last year. We're focusing again this year. And we have found along the way that one of what is becoming our go-to tools is making sure that we use the Adobe Creative Cloud, and our faculty know. We have one full-time staff person who's awesome, dedicated to helping with faculty adoption, and he's dying for support. And we're, figuring out how we can clone him and have another Willie to meet the demand. So that's kind of quick and dirty. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing all that. For those of you out there who may not really know what we're talking about what's possible when we put tools like Creative Cloud in the hands of all students, I'm sharing the portfolio with permission from a former student of mine, Valentina Arizmetti. She graduated this summer, and this is the digital portfolio that she began building in her first year in an English class that I taught. This was her first semester in her first year. And in this class, everyone tells us a digital story of community or social justice in 6 different modalities as a visual narrative using Adobe Photoshop, as a magazine article using Adobe InDesign, as a podcast using Audition, as a film using Adobe Premiere Rush, as a website using Creative Cloud Express, and as a mobile app using XD. And the reason I wanted to bring this up, because in Valentina's words, what Jonathan and Melissa just pointed to, that early experience gave her the confidence to then go try all of these things that she developed and is continuing to develop throughout her study at UNC Chapel Hill, so that when she graduates, she is future-facing learning. She is looking forward to being able to articulate, to tell the story of what she can do. In fact, if you ask her what she majored in, she'll tell you that she's a digital storyteller. And so an awareness of how that's more important than ever to be able to articulate that is something I've been thinking a lot about. So an example of that is my syllabus for my spring course on digital storytelling right now. For the first time ever, right up front, I put the NACE competencies. And if you don't know what they are, they're a list of abilities that enable students to be career ready. I put those competencies right up front in the course. The goal of this course is to do all of these things. And even in that digital storytelling class, we're focusing a lot on software. Really, it's those outcomes, it's those future-facing abilities that are reasons why we're leveraging that software in the first place. And so, the key terms here that I'm really interested in diving into today in our cafe are, that confidence and especially engagement. And I'm going to talk to Jonathan and then Melissa about thinking about the whenever, wherever aspect of transforming teaching and learning, especially with hybrid, high flex, and online learning. In a poll in 2020, in spring of 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic, Inside Higher Education asked 166 campus chancellors and presidents what was their biggest concern with going online in a hurry. And we know that we're going to go back to more on the ground learning than we had certainly during the pandemic. We all have a sense it's not going to go back ever to the same way it ever was. The biggest concern in that poll was student engagement. And that's one of the levers that we're trying to enable by transforming these pedagogies to be much more engaging in a multitude of ways. And so, Jonathan, as you unmute your mic this time, I don't know if engagement is a key word you'd like to pick up on, but we'd like to talk now about thinking about the wherever, whenever space and high flex and online learning, and how we can make those experiences particularly engaging in these ways.
Thanks, Todd. I think during the pandemic, we've learned so much around how our students approach digital in ways that we hadn't really considered previously. And there was a couple of things that really stood out to me. So the first one was we ran a survey of our students and how they were using technology during the pandemic. And 15% of our students responded to say that the devices that the university had given them were being used by their children for homeschooling. We also picked up some of the challenges that our students had around access that we hadn't fully appreciated. So the number of students who didn't have access to reliable broadband, or they were living in accommodation outside of the university where, because of the number of people in their household trying to use Wi-Fi at the same time, it was quite limiting what they were able to do. In the last couple of years, we've invested quite heavily in the ethical use of learner analytics. So we work with our student body to establish a code of practice of how we would use their data, how we would make it visible to staff and students. But that's given us, for the first time at individual level, an understanding of when students access learning on a daily basis. And we've begun to see that through personal tutors working with students, that often for many students, it's quite contracted. So it could be that actually they spend a lot of time on our virtual learning environment on a Sunday afternoon, because that's the only time they have that they can really dedicate to looking at learning materials, because they've got a job or they've got caring responsibilities, etc. So that's told us that there is this huge demand for wherever, whenever. And it's something I see on a daily basis, because I commute to the university on the train, and I can see our students getting on the train and beginning to go online and see what learning materials are available to them. So we've got this huge demand. And at the same time, we recognize that for our students, there are huge benefits to them coming onto campus, in particular the social interaction, which can sometimes be a little bit challenging online, particularly if you're entering university for the first time. So what it's making us consider is, what is the value add from technology for hybrid learning, but also for what happens on campus in the classroom, and what can we do in the future to make sure that the time students spend online and on campus is giving them the maximum value for what they're hoping to get from their degree. And it's those challenges that we're trying to work through. So how can we break down the barriers for access for digital? And then how can we really clearly define for our students the benefits of being online and on campus, and how can we get those right? Thanks, Todd.
Amazing. Melissa, what are your perspectives on these new modalities and spaces for teaching and learning, and how we can use these as an opportunity to reimagine things, to do them even potentially better than we did before?
I think, thanks, Todd. Again, Jonathan, I'm struck with the similarities in experience and students and timing and when they do their work and all of those things. One thing I wanted to mention, and I will answer your question, that we learned, and actually I learned this, I got the germ of the idea from a panel that Valentina, your student, was on, where she talked about how her preferred way to even write papers had been using her phone. And so when you talk about however, whenever, wherever, it's also whatever, no one could believe that. And so we did a lot of surveying throughout the pandemic to try to understand in real time what our faculty and student experience was. And we learned, yep, just as Valentina said, we had a very high number of students, less than half, but between 40 and 50%, whose preferred way to interact with technology was phone or iPad. So that made a difference to us, and in terms of tools, and also in terms of what our students need. But I think going forward, we're trying to make sure that we're organized in a way that meets our students' needs and our faculty needs. So I mentioned that we shifted, and we're not so modality driven in terms of organizational structure, but we're driven by values. We're starting to look at, we spend a lot of time, and the analytics are obvious to us around how our students are doing. So we're able to kind of measure our success looking at their grades, or how we proxies for engagement, like have they checked in their learning management system, how much time have they spent on things. But we haven't necessarily been able to do some good deep analysis of what impact our work has with our faculty. And so we actually are just starting to look, we're adding a position and working with our institutional research area on how we can start to develop some dashboards for us and some analytics that will help us know that, gosh, this made a difference to our faculty, or when faculty did this tweak in a class, it really did matter to students. We've had some obvious successes. We took an approach during the pandemic that we wanted our students to really own that moment, and we wanted to integrate it in the curriculum. So we did an interdisciplinary project, all virtual. We had over 500 students participate, from start to finish, and 8 different faculty in a number of classes. And it started with reading about it in history, to writing poems, to doing music, to dance, to architecture students actually putting together a place where this could be presented. And it was presented last November. I mean, it was pretty amazing to see all this happen. But we heard from our students, multiple times, that this is what made them feel connected. And so it is because they were able to work across different areas and meet students, and it was all virtual. And so I think it is how we use our spaces better now to promote community. And I think we don't always have to be so intentional. We're finding now, we're online at UTSA. We started the first 3 weeks online. Our students are still on campus because they're still living there, but they're hanging out in the library, they're hanging out in the student union. We didn't need to plan a lot of things for them. They're finding community by just being with each other. But also there are some things we can do better using tools to promote community and promote learning. And I think that interdisciplinary projects create experiential learning in a way that's not hitting them over the head. And I think that looking at things that we can do in the curriculum that create opportunities that may not be our prime focus, but that are the sidebar benefits, and then learning to measure those is part of the future of where we go. And again, I think many of us, at least in the States, are looking at the whole concept of small little credentials. And I would say, to give a plug for Adobe, there are opportunities there to do some of that. And I think that when we think about our adult students and those who are coming back maybe fully online, we maybe need to think of some creative ways for engagement there, and then embedding a little bit of skills credentialing along the way. So I think I talked around your question, but I just threw out what's in my head. So
That was fantastic. I mean, we keep coming back to these themes of building confidence, of engagement, of connecting. So that was a great answer. Thank you. And so it occurs to me that when we had this seismic shift so abruptly in spring of summer 2020, I find myself apologizing to students like, this is inherently inferior, and we're sorry that you have to go through this. And same thing for faculty. But then once you start dealing with the realities, you find that it's not just a silver lining, but it's hopefully a sunbeam toward the future.
Mhm.
And I'll give you an example of that. When Valentina did her internship, all of a sudden it was going to be all by herself in her apartment instead of going to a big office. And that seemed inferior at first, but you think about it.
Yeah.
He just had the best preparation imaginable for figuring out how to operate in the future of work, which we know is going to be more high flex than everyone shows up at 9 o'clock in the morning in an office somewhere. And so an example of that in my teaching, and Jonathan, we're warming up for a question. I'm going to ask you, what are some of the successes? What are some of the concrete things that have worked that we can share with everyone in the cafe today, to thinking about this future? And I'll give you an example from something I experienced that's made a huge difference. I've been primarily a writing teacher for over 25 years, and I've directed a writing program. And a fundamental practice in those classes is that we have students in moments working in small groups, peer groups, sometimes just pairs, responding and giving feedback to each other's drafts in progress. And that's a fundamental practice of those classes. And I've been doing that for 25 years in a brick and mortar space, 18, 20 students crammed together in a small room. And then when we went virtual, all of a sudden we were doing that now in virtual breakout rooms. And I asked students to compare that experience with others. And it was just so far superior to be able to be in a comfortable, quiet space without all the distractions of, and being able to do that at your own pace and in the comfort of of a virtual space, a far superior experience than what I've been doing for 25 years. And so just one glimpse of success that can be enabled by the new opportunities that we faced. And so, Jonathan, as your campus has moved from 2016 forward with its future-facing initiatives and accelerated those initiatives through the pandemic, what are some concrete successes and wins that you'd like to share with everyone out there that they can pick up and run with?
Thanks, Todd. I'm going to pick up on three areas. And the first one is around recognition and celebration. So when we started on our journey with Adobe, we knew that the Creative Cloud Suite was used in the obvious subjects, things like games design, fine art, etc. But we went on a journey of exploration to understand who else within the institution was using it in ways that we might not understand. And we found real pockets of excellence across the university of individual academics who were using Adobe tools with their students really effectively, but it had just never been surfaced. So this initiative has allowed us really to recognize and celebrate these staff members, to put support around their efforts and look at how we can scale some of that. So that's the first element. The second element, and it chimes with something that you were just talking about, Todd, and it's something that I'm keen to understand the impact of in more detail, is that we became, as you know, a creative campus in November 2020, and January 21 was really the beginning of the second phase of intensive lockdowns in the UK. So all of our professional development activities had to take place online whilst our academics were working from home. And I think what's been firmed up in my mind really is that within that first 6-month period, we were creating spaces online for academic staff to come together at a set time in the week, regardless of what else was going on in their lives, to focus on something positive and empowering and inspiring. And all of the feedback we've had is that that had a much broader impact on staff than just learning how to use tools. It was around being part of a community at a time when that sense of community was under threat because of the pressure that everyone was under in every aspect of their lives. And the third element, and the one that I'm most excited about moving forward, is around well-being. So we've begun to take the Creative Cloud Suite beyond the traditional bounds of learning and teaching towards areas of the university that specifically focus on supporting students with their well-being, with their mental health and resilience. And we face real challenges around this, as I think virtually every institution will, as we begin to understand the full impact that the pandemic had on individuals. But our staff in those areas are now beginning to use the tools in new and innovative ways to engage with students, but most importantly, to give them the tools to tell their stories in their own way. And that might be students who've been homeschooling for very long periods of time, who've endured bereavements, or who've been on the front line in hospitals. So I'm really excited to see how this develops and how this supports our students over the months and years to come. Thanks, Todd.
Wonderful for you to make that point, to talk about educating the holistic student and this being much more than skills training. That, you know, and I remember this being one of your pillars about the ethical use of these technologies, about being a digital citizen and about being a citizen in digitally transformed cultures and economies. And so especially important for our faculty, that, as you said, that they have a sense of community and connection, and that they're not alone and they're working through these things together. And it's so great for us in this cafe to be able to share virtually a really rich conversation that makes me feel more connected to global higher education than ever before, because we're all experiencing the same thing. So thank you so much. Melissa, over to you. Concrete successes. We've already talked about how your campus profile has been elevated and enrollments are looking up. Other, specific, success stories that you'd like to point to share with the cafe today.
Yeah, I think, thanks, Todd. I mean, one that I mentioned, but it's not insignificant, is was UTSA's participation in the research project, because it's so validating to the faculty who've been using Adobe Creative Cloud to actually see impact. and also to see that there is something that we weren't necessarily thinking of in that way that is making a specific difference. And so you know, when we look at successes, I would say that is one. And actually all of the data for that really came about. We had controls that clearly were pre-pandemic, but then most everything else was the student experience during the pandemic, where you know, many schools lost ground academically and in terms of how students were doing. And we saw some areas that we're focusing on, but to actually see that impact during that time is a success. I think, you know, it's always, when I came into this role, I had a long career in student affairs and enrollment, and then got into the academic side of the house and online. You know, we took a chance. I co-chaired the committee along with our dean of science that was going to help us figure out what we were going to do during the pandemic. And we just decided to go for it, to think about everything we were doing in terms of how it would push us forward. And no apologies, to Todd's point, not to go into this saying, gosh, we're really sorry we have to do this, but to go into this thinking, what are we going to do in creative, innovative ways that maybe we wouldn't have done it? You know, it was an accelerant for us. And I think realizing that we did set a new cultural context at UTSA around innovation and opportunity, and our students do feel more heard. I think that student government's voice in their academic experience became probably amplified multiple times over what it had been previously, because it's so important to know what they're doing. So I think a success in terms of our student connection, completely different. They're part of our panels. We had a panel last week talking about issues that faculty were facing. And, you know, they surfaced the issue and said, you know, stresses us out when you give us till Sunday to turn in assignments, because then we worry all weekend. You know, at the end of the day, just do it on a Friday. Give us Friday at midnight. You know, it's little things like that. So I think a success for us has been amplifying the student voice. Another success for us has been creating the culture of let's own the moment, and let's push ourselves to be creative and to be innovative. And you know what? If it isn't perfect, that's okay. We're still going to learn something, and it will still help move us forward. And then I think a culture around analytics that didn't necessarily exist in this way in these areas is another success for us. And I'm super excited to see where we'll be a year from now as we start looking at the impact of the work we're actually doing, in addition to how our students are doing. So I think those are a few kind of successes, and our story is, you know, we're still writing it. And that's the thing I love about higher ed, and especially UTSA and our relationship with Adobe. I know we'll have more to say a year from now and more things that we've learned. But those are a few of our successes. Thanks, Todd.
Amazing, Melissa. Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen real quick. For those of you who don't know much about the Adobe Creative Campus program or want to know how to learn more, I just in the chat pod put this URL where it gives a breakdown of the Adobe Creative Campus program, and there's a button there, of course, to get in touch with folks who can tell you more. And so we're at the top of the hour. I had a great experience. You cool kids are cooler than ever in my book. Everything you said was so valuable to me, and I thank you so much for sharing this time with us in a virtual cafe. I see in the chat pod as we're winding down, you know, the note you just hit at the end, Melissa, about the student voice is so important. And so our next Adobe Digital Literacy Cafe is scheduled for sometime in March, if I'm doing the math correctly. And I think we have a topic. We might have a panel of student voices talking about what it's like to learn digitally. And so that's a great thought to end on. Melissa, thank you so much. Jonathan, thank you so much. Any final thoughts and farewells for everyone out there? Please say goodbye to everyone.
Thank you. And Todd, thanks for being a very cool moderator and facilitator and faculty member. And great working with you, Jonathan. Thank you.
Yes, Jonathan, you want to say farewell?
Thanks, Melissa. Thanks, Todd. It's great hanging out with the cool kids for 1
Yeah.
hour at least.
And thank you all for showing up. We know your time is very
Yeah.
valuable. It's getting late in Europe, and this will be recorded and promoted. So if you want to relive it or share it with folks who need to hear the story, we're thrilled to do that. Thanks again, everyone, for being with us. And hopefully we'll see you in the next cafe in about 2 months.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks. Take care.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.